Hello, this is Dwight Mutonono, also known as Miarazi, also known as Mutos. We are now into Acts chapter 19. We're going from verse 32 and right down to verse 41 to the last verse of Acts chapter 19. In the last session, there was the uproar and there was the riot that was caused by Demetrius, and Paul was prevented, he was restrained from going in and addressing the crowd because the disciples and also the Asian officials, the officials of the province of Asia, stopped him. And we end up here now, the officials actually handle the situation. Let's read from verse 32. The assembly was in confusion. Some were shouting one thing, some another. Most of the people did not even know why they were there. The Jews pushed Alexander to the front, and some of the crowd shouted instructions to him. He motioned for silence in order to make a defense before the people. But when they realized he was a Jew, they all shouted in unison for about 2 hours, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." The city clerk quieted the crowd and said, "Men of Ephesus, doesn't all the world know that the city of Ephesus is the guardian of the temple of the great Artemis and of her image which fell from heaven? Therefore, since these facts are undeniable, you ought to be quiet and not do anything rash. You have brought these men here, though they have neither robbed temples nor blasphemed our goddess. If then Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a grievance against anybody, the courts are open, and they are proconsuls. They can press charges. If there's anything further you want to bring up, it must be settled in a legal assembly. As it is, we are in danger of being charged with rioting because of today's events. In that case, we would not be able to account for this commotion, since there is no reason for it." After he had said this, he dismissed the assembly. Okay, so there was confusion. And what was this confusion? Mob psychology. What we call mob psychology, and Luke describes it well, because it says they didn't know why they were there. Many of them did not know why they were there, and it's not wise to become involved in a mass movement, because when you have crowds together, you often end up with all sorts of things that happen, and all sorts of regrettable things happen when a mob is mobilized by people who want to stir up people's emotions. So there are many conflicting interests at play, and people's hyped up emotions can result in violence. In fact, that is exactly what the instigators would be looking for. Those who are behind this whole thing are looking for violence and chaotic chaos, so that they can inflict harm on whoever they want to do that to. So most people do not even fully understand why they are there. They are just pawns in someone's big chess game. So be careful about getting involved in a mass movement, whatever it is. Be very careful of that. So Alexander is the man who is pushed ahead to speak. Now, Luke's original audience probably knew who this Alexander is, because when you read it, it just mentions Alexander, and the author obviously assumes that you know who it is, but we don't know who this Alexander might be. It's not clear to us today, but he was pushed forward by the Jews. He tried to speak, but he was stopped. They wouldn't listen to him. But it's just of interest to think about the fact that there was an Alexander who is from Ephesus. You know, when Paul writes to Timothy, Timothy was in Ephesus, and he talks about Alexander. It's Alexander the metal worker. In both letters to Timothy, Paul mentions this person, Alexander. And I'm wondering if it's a coincidence that we get this Alexander mentioned in the letters, and then we get this Alexander who is put forward to speak. But let's talk about the one that Paul mentions in the letters and what he says about this Alexander. So in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 14 to 15, I'm quoting directly from there. Alexander, the metal worker, did me a great deal of harm. The Lord will repay him for what he has done. You too should be on your guard against him, because he strongly opposed our message. Paul is warning Timothy about Alexander, the metal worker. And then it goes on, and in 1 Timothy chapter 1 verse 20, it says, among them are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have handed over to Satan to be taught not to blaspheme. Now, handing a person over to Satan, it's a phrase that Paul uses. It is usually meant to redeem. It's meant to say, okay, if a Christian, push them out of fellowship so that they can repent and come back. So that would be what we're talking about here when we're talking about handing a person over to Satan. But the point then would have been that Alexander, maybe he had accepted the gospel at some point, and then he rejected it. And maybe he was one of the people who were there in the original synagogue when Paul was preaching in the synagogue, and then people became obstinate against the message. So he might have turned against the message at some point. Anyway, we continue. Let's talk a little bit more about this Alexander. So in Paul's letters, this Alexander was a metal worker, a similar trade to Demetrius, a silversmith. He's not called as a silversmith, but he is called a metal worker. And Demetrius, who instigated these riots in Ephesus, was a silversmith. So there's some similarities in terms of trade, and it might have been that he was one of the people that was mobilized by Demetrius. Timothy would have been in Ephesus when he received Paul's letters, and there's this, I'm just saying, if this is the route we go, then this is a strong opponent of Paul, who might have been one of the Jews who maligned him from when he left the synagogue, and he was still around. And if so, he continued to vigorously oppose Paul, and this would have been an occasion or an opportunity to slander and spread falsehoods about Paul and Christianity while promoting Judaism. So that might have been the agenda that this Alexander would have had. But he was stopped before he even spoke. The crowd, once they realized he's a Jew, didn't want to hear him. And they it's like he didn't have the authority he didn't command enough authority to control that crowd. But there was another person who did have that command and that authority. That was the city clerk. And they shouted for 2 hours, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." If you can imagine a crowd shouting for 2 hours, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." This was frenzied. They would have maybe got themselves into a really crazy frenzy state. The city or town clerk was one of the highest offices in Roman Asia. And some who held that office would be former or future Asiacs, future people who would be ruling in Asia. And Demetrius would need to lodge a formal complaint to the city town clerk if there was going to be a case to be heard. And this clerk then he brought order to this whole situation, because he was like the chief liaison with the Roman governor, and he was in charge of that city of Ephesus. So when he spoke up He was an authoritative voice. And unlike Alexander, the crowd went quiet when he got up to speak. And when he spoke, he talked about Demetrius. I mean, he basically did a subtle knock at what Demetrius was saying. Probably a very true claim that Paul was saying that man-made gods are not gods at all. But what this man said is that he reminded them that Artemis' image fell from heaven. As I said in the last session, it might have been a meteorite that we are talking about here. So Artemis' image fell from heaven. And so maybe Luke recounted this with a tongue-in-cheek to say, this is what this man said, that, okay, Artemis came from heaven. And the men who had been brought before the city clerk had not done or said anything against the official worship of Artemis. There was no charge against that. And what this city clerk managed to realize was that this was really a financial thing. These men had not done anything against Artemis, and they were just preaching the gospel. And in preaching the gospel, people were not doing the business, or people were not following Artemis in the way that they used to. And that's well and fine as far as this city official was concerned. So they were instructed to bring the matter up properly. Basically what he said is, okay, the way that you are doing this, it's a riot, it's chaos, and it is good when leaders know how to use the existing structures and systems to stop the advance of evil. The reason evil advances is evil forces break down and abuse societal structures. They want to get in there and break them down. And God's kingdom best operates in order, which is it's supported through these structures and systems. And so we need to be careful that if there's anything that wants to corrupt or to break down order and introduce chaos, it's an environment that evil forces love to operate in. So watch out when you find that chaos begins to rule in an area. It can be a situation where evil forces are about to do something in that space. Run away, walk away from situations of chaos and disorder, because that's where Satan often wants to operate in. Try to get back to order and civility and structures and systems. Then you can be able to move on again. So that's what happened in the city of Ephesus, and we'll continue in the next session and see that this becomes the closure of Paul's time in Ephesus, and he's finished with his ministry there. So we look forward to the next session, and you're blessed. Continue walking in God's blessing and continue in his favor.